Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Alex and this is the Lily Library. So today we have my fall and winter reading wrap up. I read a bunch of books at the end of the year and I think that if I put all of my reviews in one video, the video would be like an hour long. So I'm going to split it up and I'm going to do two additional videos, one being on all of the horror anthology and short story collections that I read, and then another on all of the fantasy books that I read. And I plan to continue reading a couple more fantasy series at the beginning of the year so that I can just roll them all into one video. So for the horror anthologies and short story collections that I will be sharing in a future video, but I did read this fall, those are The Gathering Dark, which is an anthology of folk horror by Tony Bolivino. Toil and Trouble, 15 Tales of Women and Witchcraft, edited by Jessica Spotswood and Tessa Sharp. Fragments of Horror by Junji Ito. Sourland by Joyce Carol Oates. Out There Screaming, an anthology of new black horror, edited by Jordan Peele. And then one that I read in the winter, Christmas and Other Horrors, edited by Ellen Datlow. So if you're interested in hearing my thoughts on any of these books, please stick around for that future video, which will be coming out at the beginning of the year. For the fantasy books that I read, Between Wrath and Mercy by Jess Weisskopf, I'm going to be finishing up this trilogy at the beginning of the new year. The These Hollow Vows duology by Lexi Ryan, which is These Hollow Vows, These Twisted Bonds. And then the Kingdom of Stars and Shadows series by Holly Renee, which is A Kingdom of Stars and Shadows, A Kingdom of Venom and Vows, A Kingdom of Blood and Betrayal, and A Kingdom of Fire and Fate. And also by Holly Renee, the Veiled Kingdom series, which I believe is going to be a trilogy. The first one being The Veiled Kingdom, the second being The Hunted Heir. I'm not sure what the third one is, but I know it comes out next year. Yeah, if you want to hear about these fantasy books and more to come within the next month and a half, I'll probably be doing this video at the end of January with all of my reviews on these series. Okay, so what I will be talking about in today's video, these are going to be standalones that I read in fall and winter. 11 books, I believe, total. Let me see. Yep, 11 books total, and I had a lot to say about them. So let's just get right into it. Okay, first on the list is going to be Piercing by Rue Murakami. This is a psychological thriller. It's a story about a father who has become obsessed with the idea of harming his small child. And in order to rid himself of these thoughts, he's convinced that he needs to harm someone else. This leads our protagonist away from his comfortable suburban life to the city of Tokyo, where he just might meet his match. This book was killer, no pun intended. Absolutely amazing. My first Rue Murakami book. This is a book about pain, what it is, how it manifests, the mark it leaves behind psychologically, physically, and emotionally. The writing was breathtaking, specifically the writing around our characters when they experience night terrors, when they're entering into the state of psychosis. It was nothing short of masterful. As someone who suffers from anxiety, I have felt similar feelings of the loss of control that our characters do. Obviously, they see it at these extreme levels, but it felt so real and so true. Unlike other horror that I read, nothing felt shocking for the sake of the reader. Everything was very thought out and intentional and delivered in a way that only a great writer could do. Definitely checking out In the Miso Soup after reading this, and yeah, just so impressed with Rue Murakami's writing as a whole. The story is also just incredible, so highly recommend this. Next, I read Pew by Catherine Lacey, which I do not have with me. I gave it to a friend. This is the story of a sleeping stranger who is found in a small town's church pew. The stranger is very ambiguous. The town is not able to tell what nationality they are, what gender they are, and because they are unable to identify them, it leads the town to feel a little uncomfortable with this visitor. However, they still let them in and find a family for this person to stay with. As Pew begins to integrate into this town, they begin to see that not everything is as it seems, and not everyone in the town presents themselves as they truly are. At the same time, there is a distrust building towards Pew from the townspeople because they cannot figure out their past. This book is an example of the premise being more successful than the execution for me. It's a book about identity and the fallible human condition, our need as a society to put people in these rigid boxes and feeling intimidated when people are their true selves. Pew acts as not only a mirror to those around them, but also challenges American ideals just with their presence. I love everything about that, but the story itself just left much to be desired for me. I think a lot was left open intentionally by the author, but I just needed a little more follow through on some of the ideas and the points. Overall, I didn't think it was a bad story at all, and I did find Lacey's writing quite intriguing to where I would pick something else up that she has written, but this story for me just felt a little flat. The next book that I read is Braiding Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teachings of Plants by Robin Wall Kimmerer. This book is a mixture of genres. It's a book about the scientific teachings of botany. It is a memoir. It is a book of Indigenous stories, and it's also a book of philosophy. It's about the reciprocity that is needed in order for nature to survive and to thrive, and how even in science, we lack these symbiotic relationships. It challenges how Western culture views scientific progress and how we can use Native teachings to lead and live a more holistic path. I read this for the Science Reading Challenge, which was hosted over by Triumphal Reads. It is the only science nonfiction that I read, but it has definitely inspired me to pick up more. I also loved the approach of this author to really weave in so much of her past, like with the sweetgrass. I thought it was very smart, very powerful in a quiet way. I learned a lot, but I also felt spiritually grounded after reading this as well. So I would definitely recommend it to everyone. The next book that we're going to talk about is Bunny by Mona Awad. Wow. This book was everything. It was a glorious fever dream and just a joy to read. Truly, it felt like this book was written for me. Mona Awad's writing is like if you mixed Ira Levin and the screenwriter Diablo Cody together. It's a little bit Witches of Eastwick, it's a little bit Frankenstein, and it's a whole lot of Cruel Intentions. And I love all of those things. I adore all of those things. So it was just fun to read it in one book. This book is about Samantha, who is an outsider in her MFA writing program at an elite college until she is invited into the inner circle of exclusivity by a group called the Bunnies. What she will find when she enters into this girl group is a dark truth she may or may not be prepared to take on. I can summarize this book in like one sentence without giving anything away, and that is that this is about the creative process and the power that resides in authentic creation. I don't want to give anything else away. If you like any of the things that I listed at the beginning of this review, if you like dark, satirical, funny, witty, pop culture, ingrained stories of dysfunctional people who are pretty macabre, you will like this story. I recommend going in as blind as humanly possible because the reveals in this are truly bonkers in the best way. It's so good. The next one is not a novel. It's pretty random, but I had to talk about it. And that is the Smithsonian History of the World Map by Map. This is published by DK Publishing, which if you are a child of the 90s, DK Publishing ruled supreme. It still does in my household. They publish fantastic books. What inspired me to pick this up is I'm an incredibly visual learner, and I've become more and more interested in antiquity, and I've found it challenging to be able to visualize where these ancient societies would reside on a modern day map. And oh, does this book deliver that. Hundreds of maps detailing civilization from the birth of humans to modern day times. It's so awesome. It's an incredible collection to have, even if you are just using it as a reference. What I love about these maps is not only do they depict location, they show routes of trade, populations, battles, where certain architecture was founded, spread of disease, migration. I mean, they have so many amazing details. And if you're just obsessed with maps like me, at one point I really thought I could be a cartographer. Delusional, not inclined artistically that way at all. But I love maps. I could stare at maps forever. When fantasy books have maps in the beginning, chef's kiss. Can't recommend it enough. This should 100% be in your collection. All right, shifting gears. We have Ghost Wall by Sarah Moss. This is a story about a family on holiday, and they are living life as if they lived in ancient Britain, surviving only with the tools of the Iron Age, with the intention of finding peace in living a simpler life. They are soon joined by an anthropology course who also are looking to reenact this way of life, but for educational purposes. And this book really is about these two groups converging. This was a bullet of a novella. I am not gonna lie to you guys, I was incredibly triggered by this book. I do not use that word lightly at all. There were several times while reading it that I truly considered putting it down and not picking it back up. I think this was caused because I didn't know what I was walking into. I had assumed that this was a kind of traditional ghost story, but it is not. This story is about the horrors of man. It requires the right headspace to be in, especially if you are a woman. There is a lot of trauma and abuse. But upon reflection, being out of it, seeing it in retrospect, it really was, phenomenal. Possibly one of the best books of the year in impact alone. It's a book really about the dangers of living in the past and about history being used as a weapon instead of a lesson. But it also talks about the amazing truth that education can undo radicalization. I truly caution any woman who reads this book, but I feel like every man 100% should, because it really shows you the horrors of being a woman. Yeah, this was an outstanding book that I don't know if I will ever read again. Like, seriously, I just don't know if I can, but it was really, really fantastic. Next horror book we have is Ring Shout by P. Djèlí Clark. This is about a group of African-American monster hunters at the beginning of the 20th century. And what are they hunting? Ku Kluxes, which are literal monsters of manifestation, which were created by the fervent racism drummed up with the release of the film Birth of a Nation. Excellent premise, excellent execution, maybe the perfect novella, truly. It has everything. I loved the author's use of a real piece of art that impacted so many people as its source of evil. I think it opens up the question on what we should revere historically. Birth of a Nation is still a film that is currently praised due to its technical cinematic achievements, but it is horrifically and unapologetically racist. And it's also the main reason why the KKK was reborn. It really opens up a good conversation about the power of art, and yeah, handled so well. The story is also fun as hell. The characters are funny. The setting is rich. The action is written very well. That can be a struggle for some writers, but I was completely immersed in the environment, and it showcases matriarchal woman power. Like, this has every single thing I love in fiction, and it's under 200 pages. So I would highly recommend this at any time, but it was incredible to read in October, and I will be picking up more P. Djèlí Clark. He also wrote a short story that I will be talking about in Out There Screaming, which was the horror anthology edited by Jordan Peele. So if you want to hear my thoughts on that one, stay tuned for that video. But yes, highly recommend. Definitely one of the best books of the year. Incredible. Oh, I completely forgot. Creativity when it came to his monsters was out of this world, completely original. I loved it. Loved it. Check it out. It was great. This one would also probably be considered a novella, and that is Graveyard Shift by M.L. Rio. So I talked about this in my library book haul and about how there is a killer playlist at the end, and there is. But let's talk about the book. This is about a group of insomniacs who unintentionally form this pact due to them all taking smoke breaks in the same abandoned graveyard. And one night, a mystery presents itself to our group of ragtag outcasts, and they begin a mission to solve it. Didn't love this one, okay? Didn't hate it, but didn't love it. The beginning was strong. The writing had this very raw, gritty, earthy, spooky vibe to it, which very much matched our atmosphere. But as the story shifted into more of a dark academia story and not necessarily a horror story, I felt the writing shifted as well, and it became a little more clinical in a way. Just not the same vibe as the beginning of the story. It kind of felt like the author had two very different stories and found a way to merge them together. The tone just didn't match from beginning to end. Being a little more well-rounded with my reading, it really didn't offer anything new, and I felt pretty indifferent about it. But the playlist at the end, Damned, Arctic Monkeys, Modest Mouse, Garbage, Patti Smith, The Kills, Maisie Star, Interpol, The Cure, honestly, the playlist was worth it. I will not be purchasing it. It will be going back to the library, but I think someone may like this. And then finally, we're going to be talking about a trilogy, which, complete transparency, I thought was fantasy, which is why I picked it up to add to that fantasy video, but it is not fantasy. It is just a YA book series, and it is the Defy the Night series, which is Defy the Night, Defend the Dawn, and Destroy the Day. Now, this book series is about the Kingdom of Kandala, and the kingdom is thrown into chaos after the assassination of the king and queen. This leaves two young princes, barely adults, actually, the youngest might still be a teenager, in charge of an entire kingdom, our king being Harriston, and our younger brother, Korik, being the king's justice. During their reign, a terrible illness is sweeping through the country. The only known cure is an elixir created by a moonflower petal. These plants quickly become scarce throughout the kingdom, but the noble and the elite, including our two princes, do not suffer because they are importing them to satisfy the needs of the rich in the kingdom. Enter in Tessa, another orphan, of course, who is an apothecary apprentice that at night steals moonflower petals from the rich to give to the poor. Obviously, this book was heavily inspired by the tale of Robin Hood. And yeah, the story goes from there. This is my hot take on the series. Are you ready for it? I'm going to give it to you. This story should have been told through the two brothers from the beginning of the series. I think Tessa was a perfectly fine FMC, but the most intriguing part about this book series is the relationship between the brothers. It's a dynamic that you do not normally see in young adult fiction, and there is a depth to it that you don't normally see in young adult fiction. I was quite impressed by that. Also, I loved the politics. Overall, I think Defy the Night is the strongest of the three. I think you can read this as a standalone. If you are curious like me, you probably just won't be able to do that because you'll have to see how the series ends. You could finish the story and be perfectly content reading book one without reading any other ones. Defend the Dawn, I was invested for about 75%. I liked where the story was going, and then there was a twist that I felt was very unnecessary. I still was interested in book 3 after finishing this, and then book 3. I think may have happened with this book is that, just my opinion, the author may have originally wanted to write 4 books in this series because so much of this narrative is all split up throughout this book, and then it's all just thrown together at the end. Just thrown together. So quick, so fast, so immediate, so instant. Not a fan of that. I think you could have easily gotten one more book out of the story if you had stretched it out, and I would have been interested still in finishing it. Majority of this book was spent on unnecessary plot. What's crazy is that normally when I read YA, I like the overall plot, but the characters are always super flat. These were such rich characters, but the plot just like couldn't contain them. It was too simplistic for them. I don't think this series was terrible at all. I finished it. I think this is the weakest book for sure, which always sucks at the end because it kind of puts a damper on the whole series. But if you want to read something good, just read the first book. Just read the first book and call it a day. But I couldn't, so you probably can't either. But Robin Hood, light retelling with a lot of politics and a really great sibling relationship. Really complex, really nuanced, really good. The series overall was okay. Okay, that's my wrap up. But it's not my full wrap up because you know I have 2 more videos coming of those horror books and of those fantasy books. So keep an eye on that. I will also be showing off my Christmas books that I got in a future video. So definitely stay tuned and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye. All right, guys, one more thing. I did want to show you what I am reading right now. Obviously, these are not going to be in this wrap up, but I'll throw them in future wrap ups. This one I can put in my fantasy wrap up. Long Live Evil by Sarah Reese Brennan. I'm 100 pages in. And it is so funny and cute, and the humor is not too much. I was a little worried about that. It is absolutely perfect for right now. Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan. Super short. I'm visiting family, and I think I can sneak that in during that trip. And The Half Known Life in Search of Paradise by Pico Iyer. This one also pretty short, so I think I can get them all in by the end of 2024. I'm very excited. What a fantastic reading year. All right, guys, I'll see you in the next video. Bye.